The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cottonwood Creek when Zachariah Bennett dragged his wife Zora Reed Bennett out of the general store by her hair, her screams piercing the evening air like a knife. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and while such displays weren't uncommon, something about this particular incident would forever change the trajectory of the small frontier town. Isaiah Young watched from the hitching post outside the saloon, his weathered hands tightening around the reins of his Palomino. He'd ridden into town just 3 days prior, a stranger passing through with little intention of staying longer than it took to rest his horse and restock supplies. But as Zachariah's fist connected with Zora's delicate face, sending her sprawling into the dirt street, something inside Isaiah snapped. "That's enough," Isaiah said, his voice cutting through the horrified murmurs of the townsfolk who had gathered to watch but done nothing to intervene. "He's done." Isaiah stepped forward, dust swirling around his worn boots as he positioned himself between the fallen woman and her enraged husband. At 32, Isaiah had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. The Civil War had claimed his youth, and the years since had hardened him, but never had he been able to stomach a man who would strike a woman. "This ain't your business, stranger," Zachariah snarled, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. At 45, he was a hulking figure with a mean reputation, known throughout the county for his silver mine and his quick temper. "That's my wife, and I'll discipline her as I see fit." Zora remained on the ground, one hand pressed to her swelling cheek, her once beautiful blue dress now coated with dust. At 28, she had already endured 5 years of marriage to a man who had shown his true colors only after the wedding vows were spoken. "Not anymore," Isaiah replied, his voice steady despite the fury building within him. "No man who lays a hand on his wife deserves to call her his." The crowd grew larger, the evening's entertainment far more interesting than whatever awaited them at home. Among them stood Sheriff Daniel Palmer, who watched with an uncomfortable expression but made no move to intervene. Bennett's silver mine employed half the town, and his influence ran deep. "You threatening me, boy?" Zachariah took a step closer, towering over Isaiah despite the younger man's own considerable height. Isaiah did not flinch. "I'm making you a promise. Touch her again, and you'll answer to me." A tense silence fell over the street, broken only by the distant piano music drifting from the saloon. Then Zachariah laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the wooden storefronts. "You hear that, folks? This drifter thinks he can ride into our town and tell Zachariah Bennett how to handle his own wife." He turned back to Isaiah, his expression darkening. "You got till sunrise to be gone from Cottonwood Creek, stranger. After that, I can't guarantee your safety." "Zachariah, please," Zora spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just go home." "Shut your mouth, woman." Zachariah turned his rage back toward her. "This is your doing, parading around town like some painted Jezebel." Isaiah moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing Zachariah's wrist before he could strike Zora again. "I said you're done." What happened next would be retold in the saloons and parlors of Cottonwood Creek for years to come. Zachariah swung with his free hand, but Isaiah dodged the blow with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to violence. In one fluid motion, he delivered a single punch to Zachariah's jaw, sending the larger man stumbling backward into the water trough with a tremendous splash. The crowd gasped collectively, then fell silent. No one had ever dared stand up to Zachariah Bennett. "Mrs. Bennett," Isaiah said, turning to offer his hand to Zora, who stared up at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Allow me to escort you somewhere safe for the evening." Before Zora could respond, Zachariah roared with rage, pulling himself from the trough, water streaming from his clothes. "You're a dead man, stranger, do you hear me?" "Dead," Sheriff Palmer finally intervened, stepping between the men. "That's enough for tonight. Bennett, go home and dry off." "You," he said, nodding to Isaiah, "you've stirred up enough trouble. I suggest you move along." "I'm not leaving the lady to face his wrath," Isaiah replied firmly. "I'll see to Mrs. Bennett's safety tonight," said a woman's voice from the crowd. Martha Wilson, the widow who ran the boarding house, stepped forward. "She can stay with me, Sheriff. No need for further unpleasantness." Zachariah pointed a threatening finger at Isaiah. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." He turned his venomous gaze to his wife. "And you? Don't think about coming home. You're no wife of mine if you allow this stranger to interfere." "Perhaps that's for the best," Zora whispered, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. The crowd began to disperse as Sheriff Palmer escorted a still cursing Zachariah away from the scene. Martha Wilson approached Zora, helping her to her feet. "Thank you," Zora said to Isaiah, meeting his eyes for the first time. They were a startling green, filled with a compassion she hadn't witnessed in a man's eyes for a very long time. "No thanks necessary, madam. No decent man stands by while a woman suffers." Isaiah tipped his hat and turned to retrieve his horse. "You shouldn't stay in town, mister," Martha said. "Young, Isaiah Young." He untied his palomino from the hitching post. "And I'm afraid I can't leave just yet. Something tells me Mrs. Bennett might need further assistance." "He'll kill you," Zora said plainly. "Zachariah doesn't make idle threats." Isaiah's expression remained calm. "I've faced worse odds, Mrs. Bennett. I'll be at the livery stable if you need me." As Martha led Zora toward the boarding house, the young woman couldn't help but look back at the tall figure leading his horse down the street. For the first time in years, someone had stood up for her, had seen her value when her husband sought only to diminish it. It was a dangerous thing, the spark of hope that ignited in her chest, but Zora couldn't bring herself to extinguish it. The boarding house was a modest two-story structure at the quieter end of Main Street, its white paint peeling slightly but its windows clean and curtained. Inside, Martha bustled about preparing a room for Zora, all the while muttering about that awful Bennett man and how someone should have stood up to him years ago. Zora sat at the kitchen table, holding a cool cloth to her bruised cheek, her thoughts a tumultuous storm. 5 years of marriage to Zachariah had taught her to be silent, to anticipate his moods, to make herself small. She had married him believing his promises of security and respect, desperate to escape the grinding poverty that had claimed her parents. The daughter of a failed prospector, Zora had few options in a territory where women were scarce and valued primarily as wives and mothers. "Here, drink this," Martha said, placing a cup of tea before her. "It'll calm your nerves." "What am I going to do, Martha?" Zora asked, her voice small. "He'll never let me go." Martha sat across from her, her kind face lined with the wisdom of her 60 years. "One day at a time, dear. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next step. That man, Mr. Young, he shouldn't have interfered. Zachariah will make him pay." "Perhaps," Martha agreed. "Or perhaps it's about time someone showed Zachariah Bennett that he can't rule this town through fear anymore." Across town, in the modest livery stable, Isaiah spread his bedroll in an empty stall, his horse nickering softly from the adjacent space. Old Jasper, the stable master, had offered him the accommodation with a knowing look and a warning. "Bennett's got men all over this town. You watch your back, son." Isaiah checked his Colt revolver before placing it within easy reach. "Always do, Jasper, always do." As he settled back on his makeshift bed, Isaiah wondered what had possessed him to insert himself into the affairs of this town. He was a drifter by choice, avoiding attachment since the war had taken everything he'd held dear. But there had been something in Zora Bennett's eyes, not just fear, but a resigned dignity that had stirred something long dormant within him. Isaiah had seen too many good people broken by those who wielded power without compassion. Perhaps it was time to take a stand, even if just this once. Morning dawned bright and clear over Cottonwood Creek, the Arizona sun already promising another scorching day. Isaiah rose early, washed at the water pump, and checked on his palomino before making his way to the town's only cafe. He was halfway through a plate of eggs and bacon when Sheriff Palmer pushed through the door, his expression grim as he spotted Isaiah. "Thought you might have had the sense to ride out during the night, young," Palmer said, taking the seat across from him without invitation. "And miss the best breakfast west of the Mississippi. That would have been a shame." Isaiah took another bite, watching the lawman carefully. Palmer leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Bennett's hired guns arrived on the morning stage, 3 of them from Tucson. Mean-looking bunch." "Is that an official warning, Sheriff? Take it however you want. I'm just telling you that staying here is a fool's errand. The Bennetts have been having troubles long before you rode in. It's not your fight." Isaiah set down his fork. "Sometimes a man has to choose his fights, Sheriff. Other times the fights choose him." Palmer shook his head. "Stubborn fool. What's your stake in this anyway? You sweet on Mrs. Bennett already." "I just don't like bullies," Isaiah replied simply. "Never have." Before Palmer could respond, the cafe door opened again, and Martha Wilson entered with Zora Bennett beside her. The bruise on Zora's cheek had darkened overnight, a vivid purple against her fair skin. The few patrons in the cafe fell silent, watching as the 2 women approached Isaiah's table. "Mr. Young," Martha greeted him, "may we join you?" Isaiah stood immediately, pulling out chairs for both women. "Please do." Zora sat with her eyes downcast, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. When she finally looked up, her gaze met Isaiah's, and he was struck again by the quiet strength behind her fear. "I want to thank you properly for yesterday," she said softly, "and to ask you to please reconsider staying in town. My husband, he will not let this humiliation stand." "Mrs. Bennett, the cafe door burst open, cutting off Isaiah's response. 3 men entered, their gun belts prominently displayed, eyes scanning the room until they found Isaiah. Behind them came Zachariah Bennett, his face still showing the mark of Isaiah's punch. "There he is," Zachariah said, pointing a thick finger at Isaiah. "That's the man who assaulted me." The lead gunman, a lean figure with a pockmarked face, stepped forward. "Isaiah Young, you're wanted for questioning in connection with a stage robbery near Fort Bowie." Sheriff Palmer stood. "What's this about, Jenkins? I've received no such notice." "Just came in," the gunman Jenkins replied smoothly. "We're deputy marshals out of Tucson. We'll need to take him in." Isaiah's expression remained unchanged, but his hand moved closer to his holstered Colt. "That's interesting, considering the Fort Bowie stage hasn't been robbed in over 2 years. A tense silence filled the cafe. Everyone present recognized the fabricated charge for what it was: Zachariah's attempt to remove Isaiah legally. "Mr. Jenkins, is it?" Isaiah continued. "I notice you're not showing any federal credentials. Real deputy marshals usually carry those." Jenkins's hand twitched toward his gun. "You calling me a liar, mister?" Sheriff Palmer moved between them. "Nobody's going anywhere with anybody until I see proper documentation. This is my jurisdiction." Zachariah's face reddened with anger. "Daniel, you know what this drifter did. He assaulted me in front of the whole town, after you struck your wife," Martha interjected, standing despite her advanced years. "We all saw that part too, Zachariah Bennett." Murmurs of agreement rose from the other patrons. Zachariah looked around, momentarily taken aback by the lack of support. "This town exists because of my silver," he snarled. "Half of you would be starving without the wages I pay." "Perhaps," said a new voice from the doorway. Theodore Harrison, the town's banker, stepped inside. "But that doesn't give you the right to terrorize your wife or hire false lawmen to do your dirty work." The atmosphere in the cafe shifted perceptibly. For the first time, the townsfolk of Cottonwood Creek were standing against Zachariah Bennett's tyranny. Zachariah assessed the room, then fixed his gaze on Zora. "You've turned them all against me, after everything I gave you." Zora stood, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "You gave me bruises and fear, Zachariah. That's not a marriage." "This isn't over," Zachariah promised, backing toward the door. "None of you will stand against me for long, and you," he pointed at Isaiah, "sleep lightly, stranger." With that, he stormed out, his hired guns following after, throwing menacing glances around the room. As the tension dissipated, Sheriff Palmer turned to Isaiah. "He's right about one thing. This isn't over. Bennett won't let this humiliation stand. Then perhaps it's time for Mrs. Bennett to consider her options," Isaiah suggested, looking at Zora. "What options?" Zora asked bitterly. "He'll never grant me a divorce, and even if he did, where would I go? What would I do?" "You could stay with me as long as needed," Martha offered. "But Isaiah's right. You need to think about your future, dear." The following days established an uneasy routine. Zora remained at Martha's boarding house, venturing out only when necessary and always accompanied by either Martha or Isaiah. Zachariah maintained his distance, but was frequently seen conferring with his hired guns or sending telegrams from the office at the train depot. Isaiah took odd jobs around town, mending fences at the livery, helping unload freight at the general store while keeping a vigilant eye on Zachariah's movements. In the evenings, he often sat on Martha's porch, cleaning his revolver or whittling pieces of wood into small animals that he presented to the children, who inevitably gathered to hear his stories of faraway places. Zora found herself drawn to these evening gatherings, sitting just inside the open doorway where she could listen without being too conspicuous. Isaiah spoke of mountains so tall their peaks disappeared into clouds, of endless prairies where wild horses ran free, of bustling cities with buildings that reached toward the sky. One evening, as the children dispersed and Martha retired early with a headache, Zora ventured onto the porch, settling into the rocking chair beside Isaiah. "You've seen so much of the world," she said softly. "It must make Cottonwood Creek seem very small and unimportant." Isaiah smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Every place has its own importance, Mrs. Bennett, its own stories and people worth knowing. Please call me Zora. After all you've done, formality seems unnecessary." "Zora, then," he agreed. "And I'm Isaiah." A comfortable silence settled between them as the desert night cooled around them, stars emerging in a velvet sky. "Tell me about yourself, Isaiah," Zora finally said. "What brings a man like you to wander so far from home?" Isaiah's hand stilled on the piece of wood he'd been carving. "Home is a complicated concept for me. I grew up in Virginia, but the war changed everything. My father and brother fought for the Confederacy. I chose the Union." "That must have been difficult," Zora said, understanding immediately the familial rift such a choice would create. "They didn't survive the war," Isaiah continued, his voice measured. "My mother passed shortly after from grief, I think. The farm was seized for taxes. After that, there didn't seem much point in staying in one place." "I'm sorry," Zora said simply. Isaiah nodded his acknowledgement of her sympathy. "What about you? How did a woman like you end up in Cottonwood Creek?" Zora sighed, her fingers unconsciously touching the fading bruise on her cheek. My father was a prospector who followed every rumor of gold or silver across the territory. We never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. When he died of fever near Flagstaff, I was 19 and alone. I worked as a seamstress, saved enough to make it here. Then I met Zachariah. He wasn't always cruel, Isaiah asked gently. No, he was charming, attentive. He promised security, respect. Zora's voice hardened. The first time he hit me was 3 months after our wedding. I dropped a crystal glass his mother had given him. The next morning he brought me wildflowers and wept with remorse. But it happened again, Isaiah said, not a question but a statement of understanding. Yes, and again. Each time with greater rage and less remorse until... She gestured vaguely to encompass their current situation. You deserve better, Zora, Isaiah said, his green eyes intense in the dim light from the lantern hanging by the door. Perhaps, she agreed, but wanting something and achieving it are very different matters. What if you could leave, start fresh somewhere else? Zora laughed without humor. With what resources? Zachariah controls everything. I came to the marriage with nothing but the clothes on my back. Isaiah hesitated, then reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I've been meaning to give you this. Curious, Zora accepted the pouch and opened it, gasping at the contents, a small but unmistakable gold nugget. Where did you get this? She asked, stunned. Found it while panning a creek about 50 miles north of here. There's more where that came from, not a fortune, but enough to start fresh somewhere. Isaiah, I couldn't possibly accept this. Consider it a loan, then. His expression was earnest. You can repay me when you're established somewhere safe. The gesture touched Zora deeply, not just for its generosity but for the belief in her capabilities it represented. For the first time in years, someone was treating her as a person of worth, not as property or a burden. Thank you, she whispered, closing her fingers around the pouch. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider your options, Isaiah replied. That's all I ask. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Both tensed as Sheriff Palmer appeared in the dim light, his expression grave. Evening, folks, Palmer said, dismounting. Hate to disturb you, but there's something you should know. Bennett's made a filing with Judge Harris claiming his wife is mentally unstable and has been abducted against her will. That's absurd, Zora exclaimed. I know that, and you know that, Palmer agreed, but the judge has authorized Bennett to reclaim his wife by force if necessary. He's gathering men at the saloon right now. Isaiah stood, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver. How many? Bennett, his 3 hired guns, and maybe 4 or 5 locals too drunk or desperate to know better. Palmer removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. I can't officially interfere with a legal order, but I thought you deserved warning. Thank you, Sheriff, Zora said, her face pale in the lantern light. What are our options? Isaiah asked. Palmer looked between them. You could both leave town tonight. I could claim I just missed you. Zora stood, a quiet determination settling over her features. No. Running would only confirm his lies. I won't be painted as mad or helpless. Then what do you propose? Isaiah asked. I'll face him, she said simply. In front of the town, just as he humiliated me. Let everyone hear the truth about Zachariah Bennett. Palmer shifted uncomfortably. That's mighty risky, Mrs. Bennett. Your husband isn't known for his restraint. Which is precisely why this needs to end, Zora insisted. One way or another. Isaiah studied her, recognizing the courage it took for her to make such a stand. If that's your decision, then I'll stand with you. Martha appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. As will I, and I suspect others will too once they know what's happening. Palmer sighed heavily. I'll try to keep things from getting out of hand, but I can't promise anything. Bennett's playing within the law, however, twisted his interpretation. When will they come? Isaiah asked. First light, most likely. Bennett wants an audience. Palmer replaced his hat. I'd better get back before my absence is noticed. Good luck to you both. As Palmer rode off, Martha ushered them inside. If you're determined to do this, you'll need rest, and perhaps a plan. The night passed in a blur of preparation. Martha sent her young helper, Timothy, to quietly spread word among those townsfolk known to disapprove of Zachariah's methods. Isaiah cleaned his revolver and checked his ammunition, hoping it wouldn't be needed but unwilling to face Bennett unprepared. Zora spent hours at Martha's writing desk, composing a statement that laid bare the truth of her marriage. If she was to publicly confront her husband, she would do so with clear evidence and unwavering resolve. Dawn broke with a sky streaked in crimson and gold, as if nature itself anticipated the coming confrontation. Isaiah, Zora, and Martha stood on the boarding house porch, watching as a group of riders approached from the direction of the saloon. Behind them, townsfolk began to emerge from their homes and businesses, drawn by the commotion or Timothy's late-night messages. Zachariah Bennett led the procession, sitting tall on his black stallion, flanked by his hired guns. Behind them rode a mismatched group of men, some looking uncomfortable with their role in the morning's events. Remember, Isaiah said quietly to Zora, you're not alone. She nodded, squeezing his hand briefly before stepping forward to the edge of the porch. In the clear morning light, she presented a striking figure, her dark hair neatly arranged, wearing a simple blue dress borrowed from Martha. The fading bruise on her cheek stood as silent testimony to her husband's cruelty. Zachariah reined his horse to a stop in the center of the street. Zora, he called, his voice carrying across the growing crowd. The time for this foolishness is over. Judge Harris has recognized your confused state of mind. You're coming home where you belong. Zora's voice rang out clear and steady in response. I am neither confused nor in need of rescue, Zachariah. I am exactly where I choose to be. Murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople. Zachariah's face darkened with anger. You're my wife, he growled. You have no choice in the matter. Being your wife doesn't make me your property, Zora replied. And I believe the good people of Cottonwood Creek deserve to know exactly what kind of man you are. She unfolded the paper she'd been clutching and began to read, her voice gaining strength with each word. She detailed the escalating abuse, the isolation, the threats that had characterized their marriage. She spoke of broken ribs carefully hidden beneath high-necked dresses, of night terrors that still plagued her, of the constant fear that had become her companion. As she spoke, the mood of the crowd shifted perceptibly. Women exchanged knowing glances, men shuffled uncomfortably, and Zachariah's supporters began to look less certain of their position. These are the ravings of a disturbed mind, Zachariah interrupted, but his protest lacked conviction as Zora continued undeterred. When she finished speaking, a profound silence fell over the street. Then, to everyone's surprise, Esther Davis, the quiet wife of the general store owner, stepped forward. She speaks the truth, Esther said. I've seen the bruises she tried to hide. We all have, though we said nothing. To our shame. One by one, other women joined Esther's testimony, recounting moments they'd witnessed or suspected Zachariah's cruelty. Men who had worked his silver mine spoke of his violent temper, his arbitrary punishments, his growing paranoia. Zachariah's face contorted with rage as his carefully constructed public image crumbled before his eyes. Enough, he roared, drawing his pistol and pointing it directly at Zora. If I can't have you, no one will. Several things happened simultaneously. Isaiah drew his Colt with lightning speed. Sheriff Palmer shouted a warning, and Martha Wilson, with surprising agility for her age, pulled Zora backward through the boarding house doorway. The shot that rang out came not from Zachariah's pistol, but from Isaiah's. With deadly accuracy, he had aimed not for Zachariah but for his weapon, sending it spinning from the man's hand. "It's over, Bennett," Isaiah said, his revolver still trained on Zachariah. "Let her go." For a moment, it seemed Zachariah might order his hired guns to open fire, but a quick glance around revealed that they were now significantly outnumbered. Several townsmen had produced weapons of their own, their expressions making it clear where their loyalties now lay. "This isn't legal," Zachariah sputtered, looking to Sheriff Palmer for support. "She's my wife." "The law may recognize your marriage," Palmer said slowly, "but it also recognizes assault, and threatening someone with a deadly weapon is a serious offense, court order or not. You're arresting me." "Me?" Zachariah's disbelief was palpable. "Do you know what will happen to this town without my silver mine?" Theodore Harrison, the banker, stepped forward again. "The mine will continue, Mr. Bennett, but perhaps under new management. The investors in Boston have been concerned about your erratic behavior for some time." Zachariah looked around wildly, witnessing the collapse of his empire in real time. His hired guns, sensing the changing tide, had already begun to distance themselves from their employer. "You'll regret this," Zachariah threatened, his voice hollow. "All of you." "The only regret in this town," Zora said, emerging from the boarding house, "is that we didn't stand against you sooner." Sheriff Palmer motioned to two of his deputies. "Take Mr. Bennett to the jail. He can cool off while we sort this matter out legally." As Zachariah was led away, still shouting threats and accusations, the tension in the air slowly dissipated. The crowd began to break up, townspeople approaching Zora with awkward apologies and expressions of support. Isaiah watched from the porch, holstering his revolver only when Zachariah was out of sight. He felt a curious mixture of relief and uncertainty. The immediate danger had passed, but what came next? He was still a drifter, unaccustomed to staying in one place for long. As if sensing his thoughts, Zora made her way back to him through the dispersing crowd. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "You did the hard part," Isaiah replied. Standing up to him took real courage. Zora smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "It's easier to be brave when you're not alone." The days that followed brought significant changes to Cottonwood Creek. Zachariah Bennett was transported to Tucson to face charges of assault and attempted murder. His silver mine operations continued under the temporary management of Theodore Harrison, with assurances from the Boston investors that the workers' positions were secure. For Zora, the changes were even more profound. With Martha's assistance, she filed for divorce, a scandalous action in 1878, but one supported by enough influential townsfolk to override conventional disapproval. Judge Harris, having heard testimonies about Zachariah's behavior and faced with the man's attempted shooting of his wife in front of witnesses, reluctantly agreed to hear the case. During this period of transition, Isaiah remained in town, taking more permanent work at the livery stable. He told himself it was to ensure Zora's continued safety, but he couldn't deny the deeper truth. Something about her drew him in a way no one had since before the war. They often spent evenings on Martha's porch, talking long into the night about their hopes, their pasts, their uncertain futures. Zora spoke of her dream to open a small dress shop, using the sewing skills that had once supported her. Isaiah shared stories of his travels, but increasingly found himself contemplating what it might be like to set down roots again. "Will you stay?" Zora asked one evening in late summer, nearly 2 months after the confrontation with Zachariah. "After everything is settled, I mean." Isaiah contemplated the question, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I've been thinking about that. There's good land available south of town. Might be suitable for raising horses." Zora's heart quickened at his words. "You've been looking at land." "Just considering possibilities," he said carefully. "For the first time in a long while, staying somewhere feels right." Their eyes met in the fading light, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had grown close during these weeks of shared purpose, but both recognized the impropriety of acknowledging deeper feelings while Zora's marriage still legally existed. "I would be glad if you stayed," Zora said simply. In September, news arrived that changed everything. Zachariah Bennett, awaiting trial in Tucson, had attempted to bribe his way out of jail. In the ensuing confrontation with guards, he had been shot and killed while trying to escape. Zora received the news with a complicated mixture of emotions: relief, regret, and finally, a sense of genuine freedom. The divorce proceedings became unnecessary, and as Zachariah's widow, she was entitled to a portion of his estate, despite the circumstances of their separation. "It seems almost wrong," she confessed to Isaiah the evening after receiving the news, "to benefit from his death." "Consider it compensation for what you endured," Isaiah suggested gently. "A chance to build the life you deserve." October brought the resolution of Zachariah's estate. Though much of his wealth was returned to the Boston investors, Zora received a settlement substantial enough to secure her independence. She purchased a small building on Main Street, preparing to open the dress shop she had dreamed of. Isaiah, true to his word, acquired land south of town and began the process of establishing a horse breeding operation, drawing on skills he had learned in his Virginia youth. Though their separate endeavors kept them busy, they found time to share meals at Martha's boarding house and attend Sunday services together, much to the approving notice of the town's inhabitants. By November, as the desert air turned crisp with the approach of winter, Isaiah found himself standing outside Zora's newly opened shop, Zora's Designs, a small gift box clutched in his hand. Through the window, he could see her arranging fabric, her face animated as she spoke with a customer. He waited until the customer departed, then entered, the small bell above the door announcing his presence. Zora looked up, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Isaiah, I wasn't expecting you until supper." "I couldn't wait," he admitted. "I have something to ask you." Zora came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "That sounds serious." "It is." Isaiah took a deep breath, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since his youth. "Zora Reed, we've known each other through difficult circumstances. We've seen each other at our most vulnerable and our strongest." "Yes," she agreed softly, her eyes never leaving his face. "I find myself thinking about you constantly, about your courage, your kindness, your determination." He held out the small box. "I'm not a wealthy man, but I offer you everything I am and everything I have." Zora accepted the box with trembling fingers, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It matches your eyes," Isaiah said. "I've been saving for it since July." "July," Zora whispered. "But that was long before I had any right to think of you this way," he acknowledged. "But I couldn't help myself. Zora Reed, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not as property to be controlled, but as a partner to be cherished." Tears filled Zora's eyes as she looked from the ring to Isaiah's hopeful face. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Young." Their wedding took place on Christmas Day, 1878, in the small white church at the edge of town. Martha Wilson stood as Zora's matron of honor, and Theodore Harrison as Isaiah's best man. The church overflowed with townsfolk who had witnessed their story unfold from violence to redemption to love. Zora wore a gown of ivory silk that she had designed and sewn herself, her dark hair adorned with sprigs of holly. Isaiah, uncharacteristically nervous, waited at the altar in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. When Zora appeared at the church door, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the gathered congregation. Isaiah watched her approach with undisguised wonder, hardly able to believe that this remarkable woman had chosen him. The minister, Reverend Thomas, spoke of new beginnings, of partnerships built on mutual respect, of love that strengthened rather than diminished. When the time came to exchange vows, Isaiah and Zora spoke their promises with clear voices and full hearts. "I take you not to possess, but to cherish," Isaiah said, departing from the traditional wording in a way that caused approving nods throughout the church. "I choose you freely and joyfully," Zora responded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. As they exchanged rings, Isaiah's a simple gold band that matched Zora's sapphire, Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife. Their kiss, witnessed by the entire town, symbolized not just their union but the community's commitment to a new understanding of marriage and respect. The celebration that followed at Martha's boarding house continued well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than the small town had seen in one place in years. Isaiah and Zora moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separated throughout the night. As evening turned to night, they slipped away to the small cabin Isaiah had built on his new land, a private sanctuary away from the curious eyes of the town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," Isaiah said, lifting Zora over the threshold in the traditional manner. "Home," Zora repeated, looking around at the simple but comfortable space that represented their future together. "I never thought I'd truly have one of those again." "We'll build it together," Isaiah promised, setting her gently on her feet, day by day. In the years that followed, Isaiah and Zora Young became pillars of the Cottonwood Creek community. Isaiah's horse breeding operation flourished, producing animals known throughout the territory for their strength and intelligence. Zora's dress shop expanded to include a small haberdashery, becoming a gathering place for women to exchange news and advice. In the spring of 1880, their first child was born, a daughter they named Martha Eleanor Young, in honor of the woman who had provided safe harbor when Zora needed it most. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Daniel Isaiah Young. The town of Cottonwood Creek grew and prospered in the new decade. The silver mine, now properly managed by a company that treated its workers fairly, continued to provide employment. New businesses opened along the main street, and a proper schoolhouse was built to accommodate the growing number of children. On warm summer evenings, Isaiah and Zora often sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the distant mountains. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of the violent day that had brought them together, of the courage it had taken to stand against tyranny. More often, they spoke of the future, of their hopes for their children, of their dreams for their community. "You ever regret it?" Zora asked one such evening as they watched 5-year-old Martha attempting to teach 3-year-old Daniel how to twirl in circles without falling. "Staying here, settling down with me." Isaiah took her hand, running his thumb over the sapphire ring that still adorned her finger. "Not for a single moment," he replied truthfully. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever after the war, a place to belong. And you gave me the courage to believe I deserved better, Zora said, leaning her head against his shoulder. As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, a celestial canopy over the life they had built together. Their children's laughter floated on the evening breeze, a joyful sound that neither Isaiah nor Zora took for granted, knowing as they did the darkness from which their happiness had emerged. I love you, Isaiah Young, Zora said softly, turning her face up to his. And I love you, Zora Young, he replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. In the years that followed, the story of Isaiah and Zora Young became something of a legend in Cottonwood Creek, a tale of courage, redemption, and love triumphant over cruelty. It was a reminder that even in the wild, often lawless frontier, justice and compassion could prevail, and that sometimes the most important stand a person could take was against those who abused power over the vulnerable. Their legacy lived on not just in their children and grandchildren, but in the character of the town itself, a place where women's voices were heard, where domestic violence was not tolerated, and where the true measure of a man was not his wealth or strength, but his compassion and respect for others. And it all began with a single moment of courage, when a drifting cowboy witnessed an injustice and simply said, "He's done."